Welcome to the Holistic Health Bites podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Nicholson, here with bite-sized episodes to empower, educate, and enlighten you with ways to lose weight, heal your gut, and achieve your ideal health so you can live an adventure-filled life. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Holistic Health Bites podcast. Today we are talking all about diabetes, the different forms, as well as other blood sugar dysregulation conditions. So let's first break down the different kinds of diabetes. Type 1 is an autoimmune condition where the body's own immune system is attacking portions of the pancreas that produce insulin, namely either the beta cells or they're also called the islets of Langerhans. This type of diabetes does seem to have a genetic component and often appears in children, adolescents, and young adults. The diagnosis of type 1 is generally based on blood chemistry, like your blood glucose or blood sugar, insulin, C-peptide, and various antibodies that can be working against the pancreatic cells or various proteins, including insulin directly. Currently, there is no remedy for fully reversing type 1 diabetes, but it can be well managed through a lower carbohydrate whole food eating plan and the use of minimal insulin or other medications. The key here is using as little insulin as possible while still maintaining adequate blood sugars so that you don't progress other forms of diseases that high insulin can cause. And high insulin can both be from inside your body or from taking too much. So managing it with the diet so that you need less insulin is key. As with all conditions, diet and lifestyle can minimize further damage and help people live full, robust lives. A poorly managed type 1 diabetes diet that requires the use of large doses of insulin can actually lead to insulin resistance and potentially even having both type 1 and type 2 in one person. Now, type 2 diabetes is the diabetes that most of us are familiar with. It's primarily caused by poor diet and lifestyle choices, though it does also seem to have some components that are genetically based as well. This is a condition of chronically elevated blood sugar levels that initially drive chronically elevated insulin levels. Many doctors will diagnose type 2 if they see elevated fasting blood sugar and or significantly elevated hemoglobin A1C that's greater than 6.5%. Now we're going to come back to type 2 diabetes in a few moments as this is the most common and most easily remedied with diet and lifestyle. In many cases, it can be fully reversed. Now, type 1.5 is a form that most of you likely haven't heard of. This is also known as latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, or LADA. And this is becoming increasingly more common, as are most autoimmune conditions. They call it 1.5 because it shares features of both type 1 and of type 2. It kind of fits right in the middle. It's generally diagnosed later in life than most type 1 diabetics are, but it does have the autoimmune component like type 1 does. Now, a lot of times there's misdiagnoses of both type 1.5 that's actually type 2 or diagnosed as type 2 when it's actually 1.5. And a lot of times they discover this mistake because the medications being given don't work right. So those who truly do have type 1.5, they may eventually need to use insulin, but they initially are still producing their own insulin. The same diet and lifestyle advice of a healthy low-carb diet and overall lifestyle strategies can help prevent additional damage to the pancreas, therefore reducing the need for increasing medications as the person progresses through life. And one final type of diabetes is called MODY, or mature onset of diabetes of the young. This is a rare genetic disorder that causes a slow onset of diabetes type symptoms, but generally does not present with some of the type 2 symptoms like obesity. This type of diabetes can usually be treated with diet, lifestyle, and some basic medications. Generally does not require insulin, but can require insulin in some cases. I'll also mention here that some experts now are talking about type 3 diabetes, which is directly related to Alzheimer's and dementia caused by insulin resistance of the brain. Some studies have shown tremendous improvement in cognition in these people when they follow a low carb or ketogenic diet, or if they take exogenous ketones for people who can't follow the diet. Their disease has progressed far enough that they really can't adhere to a strict dietary protocol, or they don't really have control over the foods that they're consuming because they live in a assisted living facility. Taking exogenous ketones can be helpful to give energy to the brain that doesn't rely on the cells being able to take up glucose, which is where insulin resistance is causing the problem in the brain. The brain cells can't take up the glucose properly, so they're literally lacking energy in the brain. The ketones can slip right through, even though the person has the insulin resistance, and it can provide that much needed fuel in the brain. So that is a new type of diabetes that you may hear more about. I'll talk more about this in an upcoming episode about brain health as it relates to metabolic health. So let's talk about some other blood sugar imbalance conditions that don't necessarily rise to the level of a disease diagnosis. So insulin resistance, we've mentioned that a few times already. This is a state in the body where the cells aren't responding to the presence of insulin. Insulin resistance can also develop in metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes cases, and often actually precedes those and ends up progressing into metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. In general, insulin resistance develops due to chronically elevated blood sugars that trigger elevated levels of insulin to be released. When the cells are already full of sugar, the cells won't allow any more in. They literally can't stuff any more sugar in. This then signals the cells to turn down that sensitivity to insulin, meaning that it can't attach to the cell and allow more glucose in. The cellular receptors are literally turned down. The blood sugar is still high in this case, so the pancreas produces even more insulin to get the sugar out of the blood and into the cells, because the sugar in the blood is toxic. So basically, the pancreas is screaming at the cells to allow more sugar in. But just like the boy who cried wolf, the cells aren't listening anymore. Often, people with insulin resistance will feel more tired after eating and will also feel the need to eat sweets after meals. This is happening because the glucose from the meal is stuck in the blood, unable to get into the cell where it can be used for energy. The body perceives this lack of fuel for energy and turns up the appetite, specifically for fast-acting fuel like sugar. This, of course, doesn't actually help anything and just further drives elevated blood sugars and insulin levels. Hypoglycemia is a condition of blood sugars dropping too much. There are two different primary kinds of hypoglycemia: fasting hypoglycemia and reactive hypoglycemia. Fasting hypoglycemia would be found on a fasting blood test and would typically show a value of less than 70, and the person would likely have symptoms like shakiness, tiredness, brain fog, weakness, those sorts of things. These symptoms can also present at any time throughout the day when blood sugar levels fall too low between meals. So this is typically thought of as a fasting result, but it can happen anytime during the day. People with fasting hypoglycemia often feel more energy after meals. Reactive hypoglycemia specifically occurs about 3 hours after consuming a meal. Generally, this starts with elevated blood sugars about an hour after eating from the meal, generally greater than 130 milligrams per deciliter, and then they plummet below 70 at about 3 hours after eating. This is due to the body overreacting to the elevated blood sugar levels, and it pumps out too much insulin, and then the blood sugars drop too low. Low blood sugars can also occur due to excessive alcohol intake, excessive insulin injections for anyone taking insulin, and intake of medications like propranolol or other diabetes medications. Both types of hypoglycemia can fuel insulin resistance, so it's important to avoid excessively high blood sugar levels that cause this whole cycle to begin. So how do you know if you have any of these conditions? Well, testing is the best way. A comprehensive blood chemistry panel can provide great insights as to what's really going on in the body. If type 1 or LADA are suspected, antibody testing is important. If MODY is suspected, a genetic test can be performed. If hypoglycemia, insulin resistance, or type 2 are suspected, markers like fasting glucose, fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, LDH, sometimes you'll see it on a lab as LD, fructosamine, C-peptide, leptin, your lipid panel, which is your standard cholesterol panel, liver enzymes, and uric acid can be very helpful in determining what's going on. Just know that most conventional doctors are only going to run a few of these markers, which can be helpful, but they just don't provide as much detail to really delineate what's going on. If you would like to have a comprehensive panel done like this and your doctor won't run a more comprehensive panel, let me know. I'm happy to help out. What can be done if you do have blood sugar dysregulation in any of these conditions or diseases? Well, diet is the first and biggest factor. So you want to focus on a whole food diet that is low or free of refined carbohydrates, has low to moderate whole food carbohydrates and starches, and how low that goes is really dependent on the severity of your condition, which again is why testing is so important, so that we know where you fall on the spectrum of all of these conditions and diseases. And you really want to fill the diet with quality proteins and healthy fats. Beyond diet, you want to ensure that you're getting adequate daily movement or exercise, you're getting adequate sleep, you're managing your stress levels, and reducing toxin exposures as much as possible. All of these things, if you have a sedentary life, not adequate sleep, you have high stress levels, or a high toxin exposure, those are all inflammatory to the body, and they can affect how well you handle blood sugar. Blood sugar imbalances are directly related to nearly every health condition, from depression, anxiety, thyroid disorders, migraines, hormone imbalances and infertility, cognitive decline, heart disease, hypertension, vision and hearing impairments, gut imbalances, declining bone health, cancer, and so much more. And as we've talked about on a previous episode, currently there are less than 12% of the adult population that are metabolically healthy. So even without labs, if you have low energy, excess weight, brain fog, frequent illnesses, pain, headaches, high blood pressure, hormone imbalances, or any other undesired symptom, this definitely applies to you. The great news is a lot of these issues can be eliminated or greatly improved through a holistic diet and lifestyle strategies. I'm here to answer any questions that you have and guide you on the best next steps for you. In the next episode, we are going to be talking all about heart disease and hypertension. So see you again on the next episode. Until then, be well and vibrant. Thanks for being a faithful listener to the podcast. I'd love it if you left me a 5-star review on this podcast so that others can more easily find this valuable information. Did you know I also work one-on-one with clients? I approach solving health challenges like I approached solving crimes, by conducting a thorough investigation into your case. Sadly, hundreds of millions of people in the US have insulin resistance, prediabetes, and diabetes, and the vast majority have no idea. I'm here to fix that. If you struggle with low energy, stubborn weight, hypertension, sleep disturbances, or any other undesired symptoms, let's talk. All you have to do is schedule a free call. The link will be in the show notes. And no, you do not need to live near me.